Buonasera e benvenuti a Open ARTI, che è l'ultimo modulo del progetto Open, sostenuto da Vodafone Edizioni Zero. Sto per introdurvi un ospite che per me è molto prezioso. Per chi ha già seguito la programmazione di Open ARTI dall'inizio di maggio ad oggi e per chi ha già visto anche il programma da qui alla fine del mese, perché staremo qua in triennale fino al 31 di maggio, si sarà accorto di come, soprattutto da un punto di vista musicale, abbiamo cercato di lavorare su due binari. Da un lato, come dire, chi in questo momento sta facendo ricerca e sta cercando di archiviare, digitalizzare e anche antologizzare per certi versi molte musiche degli ultimi 30-40 anni, direi, soprattutto legate a territori altri, e con questo intendo alcune aree dell'Africa piuttosto che alcune aree dell'America Latina. E sto pensando in particolare a Awesome Tales from Africa, che ha aperto il modulo Open ARTI il 2 di maggio, e sto pensando anche a Miles Claret, che suonerà tra poco alle 20 nel palco esterno. Sto pensando a Soul Jazz Sound System, che li vedremo invece il 31 di maggio. Quindi questo da un lato. Dall'altro abbiamo invece cercato di lavorare più in quel, come dire, macro territorio della musica elettronica contemporanea, spingendo in particolar modo sull'innovazione tecnologica. Oggi abbiamo Jace Clayton, DJ Rupture, qui da parte a me, e abbiamo voluto non a caso averlo al centro, cioè è un possibile perno per noi della programmazione, infatti oggi è il 16 di maggio, perché in qualche modo incarna un po' queste due strade. Da un lato perché lui è un giornalista e un blogger abbastanza affermato, che collabora con molte testate anche legate all'arte come Freeze per esempio, e quindi in quel caso fa ricerca. Dall'altro punto di vista perché invece è un DJ e un producer di fama internazionale che ha una storia di più di 10 anni alle spalle, che ha lavorato con moltissime label fondamentali per la musica elettronica, direi, come alcune che ora sono un po' sconosciute, tipo la Tiger Beat Sticks, che però alla fine degli anni 90 e primi 2000 è stata centrale, e di conseguenza, come dire, sta un po' nel mezzo tra le nostre due direzioni iniziali che vi ho appena raccontato. Prima di partire vi dico che il talk sarà in inglese, quindi vi invito a interrompere o a chiedere se ci sono cose non chiare. Inizierei. So welcome, Jace. I'm very pleased you are here, and I just gave a brief introduction about basically who you are and why you are here and why it's so important to have you here inside Open ARTI. So first of all, I think the best is to give like a brief introduction and biography about you and your history. So.
Okay, yeah, so my name is Jace Clayton. I DJ and mix records as DJ Rupture. I live in New York City, in Brooklyn. And if I talk too fast, tell me to slow down.
Please slow down.
Okay. And so, yeah, so I entered into this whole world via the radio, which led me to start DJing. And I began DJing in the late 90s. When drum and bass and jungle was very exciting and interesting to me. And then as that music sort of stabilized and the initial enthusiasm and complexity and excitement left and became more boring, as a DJ, I was still really excited by the medium, using records to mix and, you know, turntable as interface. And so I started bringing in other types of music. I would start mixing in hip-hop beats and, say, like an R&B a cappella, with drum and bass beats, and then once I became more fluid with that, I started reaching out more and more and trying to bring in different types of beat patterns, and really my setup evolved into 3 different turntables and lots of sound sources. And I slowly started becoming more comfortable with mixing, and then I started incorporating elements of African music and Arabic music until I evolved the style that I have today, that I'll be playing a little bit later, which is thinking of mixing music more as a narrative activity, so leaving aside issues of genre and just trying to sort of, you know, voice my thing with these different records. And alongside my musical explorations, I also do a fair amount of writing about music, as you mentioned in your introduction. So yeah, that's the brief.
Yeah, so what about your journalistic activity? And also you are like a really well-known blogger as well, so just how do you like approach these kind of things?
Yeah, well, that's a good question, actually. I mean, a lot of music criticism and a lot of writing about music is very, very boring, you know. And for a lot of writers, the main question is like, oh, well, let's write about this album, and let's think about whether or not this album is good or bad, you know, or give it a number, for example. And so I'm really interested in the social contexts that give rise to different types of music, and the ways in which people are understanding that. But then I'm also interested in things like auto-tune, you know, for example, which is that robotic vocal sound I think we'll get to later. But something that in the States, in America, people will listen to auto-tune and say, oh, that's just terrible pop music. It's what T-Pain puts in his choruses. Whereas, in fact, if you've been listening carefully, auto-tune is happening all over the world. And everywhere, you know, a different musical community embraces auto-tune, they're using it in a very, very different way. You know, so I'm thinking, well, look, people in West Africa are doing this one thing with auto-tune, but if you move up to North Africa, completely different context, and you move over to the States. And so that type of interesting moments where music and maybe music technology and interact are very, very fascinating to me as a writer.
And this thing about the autotune broke to Morocco last year to do a project. It was called Beyond Digital, and it was not only you, but like a proper team of people working behind it, and you spent like a month in Casablanca.
Yes. Yeah, maybe now would be a good chance to play like an inspirational song. And so So one thing, as I was mentioning, this interest in autotune, and specifically autotune in Africa, North Africa, I lived in Spain for a while, and while I was there, I would get all this Berber music starting in the early 2000s. And it was so, before I knew what it was called, I recognized the effect. This was before it became popular in American pop, after Cher introduced it in 1990.
So when was it?
This was like 2001, 2002. And I was hearing songs like this. And what I'm about to play, this is Sheb Adil, otherwise known as Adil El-Maloudi. And the song is so interesting to me because, as you'll hear, everything else is acoustic. It starts off with this acoustic Berber instrument called an utar, and some people playing bendirs, you know, hand percussion. So everything else is very Moroccan, very Berber. The lyrics, the sound, everything, except for autotune, except for the fact that there's this full synthetic thing on the vocal. So out of all the various types of Western, foreign production that people, effects, production values, autotune was the one thing that entered into this otherwise incredibly sort of traditional music. So this is a track. This is what the introduction.
وادي هدية في خطر الشيافر في خطر خويا حميد كوسوفو في خطر الشاوي وننزل البوالور في خطر ولادي السف وننزل بني ملال خويا الهادي وننزل القلعة لا عندك المال لا تقولش عندي الصحاب وهموا للمال قاع الناس راهم اصحابه واتا في الصحابة الساسي قالوا ظنك خابة اللي كانوا البارح اليوم وحال يتصابوا وراني كونار الميمة اللي ما درتش الدار بقيت الكاس مور الكاس.
And so it actually takes a while before it gets to the beat. But I was hearing music like this and finding no information about it online, or nothing certainly in English or Spanish that I could engage with. And so part of this project that we did last June in Casablanca involved saying, let's take a song like that and see if we can find the person who made it, sit down with him, ask him some questions about what he's doing and how he's doing it, and sort of use that curiosity as a way to go to a place and think seriously about the ways in which, you know, new electronic techniques are informing this type of popular or traditional music. And so that's exactly what we did, basically. A friend of mine was able to ID that the singer, because in the beginning of the track, he'll often announce who he's performing with and his name, so a friend of mine said, hey, I think this guy's calling himself Sheb Adil. And then I talk about autotune a lot, as my friends know. And so slowly I was just telling these ideas, like, wouldn't it be interesting to do this in Morocco? And then suddenly a photographer friend of mine said, oh yeah, like that sounds like a great project. If that happens, I'd like to come along. Another musician friend, a guy by the name of Magabo, he has a long-standing engagement with working with African music as well. He's a guy who lives in Brazil. And so by the end of this introductory period, there were 7 of us. And we're saying, okay, we're going to do this. We're going to rent an apartment in Casablanca for a month. We're going to go there and do some interviews with people, do some collaborations with musicians, and do some visual reportage, and generally use it as kind of like somewhere between a research trip and a kind of do-it-yourself art residency, with some of these loose guiding questions, and taking us to the city, which is what happened.
So, what kind of projects came out of this experience after that?
So, I mean, the biggest thing for me was a project, of course, a project of mine called Sufi plugins. And while I was there ostensibly studying autotune, I was also thinking a lot about possibilities for making my own software. And in particular, I was really interested in thinking about ways in which software sort of limits or shapes, or software embodies beliefs of the people who make it. And I'd done a lot of work with Moroccan musicians when I was living in Barcelona, and one of the first problems we had was the time signatures, the time beats. The Moroccan music has a lot of polyrhythms in it, which computerized programs don't play well with at all. They default to 4/4, like almost all pop you'll hear on the radio, and they don't play well. And then another issue was the way in which keyboards and synthesizers are tuned, because there's all these different scales in use all over the world, but specifically to work with Arabic and North African music, I wanted those electronic sounds, but in order to get the notes in tune so that I could, say, perform with a violinist friend, it was an incredible difficulty. And so I initiated this project called Sufi Plugins, which was essentially making a bunch of sort of music apps, a bunch of small musical programs that work inside a bigger program called Ableton Live, that are based on these non-Western or poetic ideas about sound, and actually work as performance tools at the same time. And so one of the things I was doing in Casablanca was both talking with musicians and learning about scales and getting some basic information, but I was also really intrigued by presenting the interface of these plugins as a different thing. And so...
Yeah, maybe you can show the video.
Yeah, this is on. So for example, this right here is what our drum machine looks like. It's a clapping drum machine. And I guess we can play the video. It might be the move. But so I use my time, or some of my time in Morocco. So one of the things I did was to get all these interesting electronic music words translated into a language of Berber. Oops. This is a view of Ableton, as you can see. A very common music software production. And this, zooming in, is, for example, this is one of the synthesizers we built.
So can you explain us a little bit about all the symbols and...
Sure.
Yeah, maybe I stop it.
Yeah, so it's about half of the synthesizer. And so what you see here, if you work with electronic music, some of these shapes might be familiar to you. But all the words have been translated not only into Berber, but into this Berber script, which is called Neo-Tifinar, which they borrowed from the Tuaregs. So it's a script which has been around for thousands of years, but for ages Berber was unwritten, and then they ended up borrowing it. But for me, I'm interested in software.
So, sorry, did you work with someone in Morocco to study, this kind of...
Yes, we worked with a woman called Mariam Demyati of the Royal Institute for Amazigh Culture, and who was very generous, because I explained this crazy project. And I was like, can I spend an afternoon, translating these obscure words like oscillator, low pass filter or sample size, and she was like, sure, and so yeah, and it required 3 of us in English and French and Arabic, all getting to the Berber. But so all these symbols are in fact words. So everything, that's kind of one of the jokes you might say behind them, is that everything is very clearly labeled, but you have to be able to read Berber to understand what it is, So, and then as you can see what says the invisible guide, everything in the software, it's set up so that if you hover over, an image, words will pop up. And ordinarily with software, the words that would pop up would be like volume or something. But for this, I decided to put in all sorts of Sufi poetry from about the 14th century up until now. So that's what's going on. And this is a functional synthesizer, so you can hook in, as you'll see in the video, you can hook up a keyboard and play it. And it defaults to one of 4 maqam scales, which are sort of Arabic music scales with quarter tones built into them. But you can't, say, play a C major. You couldn't play a Beatles song with it.
So it's been designed, Max MSP.
Yes, yeah, Max MSP. So all these sounds that you're about to hear are generated by these programs.
What is it called? There is another part of the plugin dedicated to the prayer, the hour of the prayer.
Yeah, and the idea, I mean, I'm really interested in somehow all software shouldn't be. I'm interested in alternative functionality as well. And so one of the Sufi plugins is a piece called Devotion. And we were staying, as part of Beyond Digital, we spent about a week as house guests in a small village called Isafen in South Morocco. And this guy, Abdullah Wargi, the man of the house, he was a muezzin. So each day, twice a day, he would go do the call to prayer at the local mosque. And his son, Hassan Wargi, is a phenomenal musician, but his father is very religious, very strict, and has an anti-music stance. So it was amazing to be... Oh, so his father doesn't like music, at all. So he has not heard his son. His son makes amazing music. His father won't listen to it. And so we were there, and I was just observing their interactions. And apart from that, they get along really well. And then and this was when I was working on the Sufi plugin. So I said, well, what could we make that might be useful to him? And in Morocco, I'd noticed, buying music in Morocco, I'd noticed that, you know, you'd be in a store and the store runner will play you CDs. I'd say, oh, listen to that, and he'll play it. But when the call to prayer happens, they immediately pause the CD to let, you know, the minute pass while the call to prayer goes. And it's kind of funny because once I was in a stand in Marrakesh, and the call to prayer came on. I was buying music, and the call to prayer came on. The guy reaches to hit pause, but he wasn't even playing music. You know, he was just like automatic response, like to respect that sonic, you know, moment of the divine. And so I said, okay, well, that could be the solution. Let's make a plugin called Devotion, and then the idea is that 5 times a day during the call to prayer, Devotion will lower the volume of your computer. But there are presets, so you need to choose your belief level: agnostic, fervent, devout, apostate.
Interesting. And one question came to my mind when you were saying, when you how do you buy music in I mean, when you are over there, how do you choose? Like, I see on your blog that every time you came back from a trip, you have like piles and piles of CDs, and you also asked to someone to just put in MP3 because it's easier to listen to. So how do you?
Yeah, that's one of the central questions of our musical times. Is like, how do you buy music? That's what the record companies care about. But then as a DJ, like, how do you filter? How do you take all this in? And so, wow, I mean, it varies a lot because the ways in which music sold are so different from place to place. But in general,
I was thinking specifically about your Moroccan experience.
Yeah, so in Morocco, it's very funny because I don't speak any Arabic, I don't speak any French, but I know a lot of Moroccan music. So I'll go to a store and I can start naming all of these musicians that only like old people care about, you know. And so the store owner would be like, why do you even who is this person? And then that kind of sets you off on a roll because suddenly there's this kind of understanding. And that's just come from years of getting cassettes whenever I could, getting CDs whenever I could, and slowly building up and searching. In Morocco, like most parts of the world, music is pirated. I mean, there's some CDs which you can get, but music is very inexpensive. And usually store owners, especially if you're actively interested, are willing to sit down and play you some things and help answer basic questions. So it's an interesting culture because it's musically rich. It's very hard to see music, but there's still a lot of memory, even as the CDs get bootlegged to death and the quality degrades.
Nice. So maybe the audience have any question about the plugins or even technical?
It's totally machine, so it's all synthetic. You know, there's 4 different synthesizers, and each of those is built differently. So each of them will have a different characteristic. And of course, all the things on the screen are knobs you can...
So they are not samples?
They're not samples, no, not samples. And there's a drone machine, which has its own 4 independent voices. Although we've set it up so that you can pass your own sound through this drone machine, and then it will filter it and shape it. But yeah, they're like keyboards, you know, and it's an instrument, exactly. They're instruments. And the clapping drum machine, so, you know, it showed up towards the end of the video. So this is another synthesizer, like say a keyboard, a weird one. And so this is the clapping drum machine. This is the only one that has samples, but the samples are it's us clapping one at a time. And the parameters you can adjust are how many pairs of hands are clapping, whether or not it's like applause, more like random clapping, or like everybody clapping at precisely the same time. You can adjust the stereo spread, and you can adjust the playback speed, which means the pitch more or less. It's a composition tool or a music writing tool, and you can use it in a live performance, but it's not, I mean, the art DJing for me is a very separate thing. So yeah, this is for people who are actively working on computer music production. It's actually amazing. I put these out on Monday, and then yesterday, so it's on Tuesday, a sound artist in Bahrain had downloaded these. He actually downloaded the Hijaz one is the one he used. He took a crazy photograph of a cat. Anyhow, he used a synth like this. He took a photograph of a cat and used some weird software to transform that into a score. So interested in like experimental ways of getting sound, but basically 24 hours later, this composer sent me an experimental sound piece composed entirely using the sounds from one of these, which we put online on Monday, which was kind of amazing. Wow. Yeah.
So do you expect like a lot of answers and downloads from also Africa? And
that's the next step of the project for me, because while this program, it's fantastic, it's a great program, Ableton Live. I use it to produce as do many of my friends. It is not that popular in Africa and the Middle East. Okay. But the way plugins work is that, kind of to make a long story short, if we wrote them in we were writing them in a different computer language, so they'll be more easy to share with people using other programs that are more popular in the Arabic world. Like I really want my friends in Casablanca to be able to use this. They use a program called Cubase, so we need to port them from Max MSP for Ableton into C++ or something for another language. But hopefully in the next four months or so, that'll be possible.
And it's interesting because it's exactly the same for the video, because in the Nollywood industry, in the cinematography in Nigeria, they still use the mini DV cameras. So I have, for example, an old XL1S. It's a Canon, which is not used anymore here because we all switched to HD. Yes. So, but still, there is a big market about this, and of course, it's a different type of image and a different type of output. So I can imagine it's more or less the same with sound.
Definitely. That's what I took a very nice nap today, and I woke up thinking, I'm like, Sufi plugins, they're like a time machine. It's like, so I'm interested in like really inexpensive time machines. Like, what's the cheapest way you can travel? And so if like this present time we're in is a linear time, where it's all about the new upgrade, the new iPhone, all about these like very strong moments of modernity. Like, what about non-linear time? What about more like traditional time or circular time, or time that's not about linear growth but about sustenance? And so making these plugins, which are referencing this old language, and making plugins that are they're certainly not profit-oriented and really coming at software from a different developmental angle. I'm like, this is a very basic time machine. Like, this is my time. This is non-linear time.
Sure.
Yeah. Oh, it's just digital synthesizing. Yeah, no convolution. And actually, it's a team. Like, it's my baby, but I work with a very talented Max MSP programmer who kind of does the math for all this.
I have one more curiosity. I mean, it's a totally different argument and discourse, but you've been to Mexico many times, and you also wrote a piece about this kind of recent genre called tribal garachero.
Yes.
And I don't know, maybe if you'd like to talk a little bit about it. Sure. And just introduce to the people, because I'm sure it's quite interesting.
Yeah, okay. That's funny. Tribal guarachero. So 2 years ago now, I was in Monterrey, North Mexico, doing a show, actually. And a friend of mine there, a producer, a guy named Toy Selecta, he was like, there's a teen rave we need to go check out. And I was like, oh, teen rave?
Okay.
Teen, awesome. In downtown Mexico? Yes. And so we go on a Sunday afternoon, and there's 3,000 to 4,000 kids all dancing like crazy in this big building in the middle of downtown Monterrey. And the music is really, really interesting, because the music is, well, they're mixing it up. So some of the music they'll play will be traditional cumbias, sort of like slow shaker music. Yeah. Some of the music they're playing was like rap in Spanish. But most of it was this stuff called tribal guarachero, which it's like house music tempo. It's around like 128 BPM. And it's music which you can tell they've been listening to electro, they've been listening to Tiesto, and they've been listening to Israeli psychedelic trance, which is also big in Mexican countryside raves. But they've also been listening to like Mexican cowboy music, like rancheros and norteños, and all of that gets sampled in the music. And so it's a mix of like very like staccato, bright synthesizer stabs, but then they'll have, say, a triplet timing feel from all this Mexican music, and then they'll sample some weird old Mexican song. And so I was like, this is incredible. And I returned a month later with a photographer to do a piece on it. And the music, it's so interesting now because it's like a post-YouTube kind of music. Yeah. It's kids who watch YouTube to learn how to make it, first off. They're saying, okay, I use Fruity Loops. You go on YouTube, type how to make a beat, and then they start learning. but it's also kids who use, like the recommended videos on YouTube as a way of sample surfing and a way of teaching themselves about music. And at the same time, it's very Mexican. It's very, very local. Like this scene we saw, like it's, in Monterrey, like thousands and thousands of kids dancing every weekend. But, maybe the oldest person there was like 22 years old. So a really...
It's only Monterrey or also Mexico City or other cities in Mexico?
As a genre, it began in Mexico. I mean, first off, youth cultures in Mexico change and mutate incredibly fast. And so the tribal began in Mexico City. And there, people really began it with these references to the sort of mythic Aztec past. So they're sampling a lot of, like pre-Hispanic flutes and pre-Hispanic drum samples. There's a guy named Jorge Reyes who did a lot of 1980s electronic music, but again with like thinking about Aztec musical structures. And like those kids love Jorge Reyes, and they love the sort of like kitschy Aztec aspects. But then tribals went out of favor in Mexico City as like reggaeton became a bit more famous, a bit more well known. But in Monterrey, the kids took it and ran with it. But then what happens since then, because these guys have had commercial success, now it's like spreading back to Mexico City and spreading back all over Mexico.
Do you have any sample, like any song about this? I mean, it was not planned, so...
We can do the Inténtalo video.
Yeah, sure,
That's
do
probably,
that.
That's funny, Tribal Guarachero.
Yeah, in the meantime, if you have any question, this is the right moment, because this could be like the ending title, yeah.
Because you talked about the format.
Well, they're maqam scales, and a maqam, it's a musical concept as much as it is a scale. And so in Arabic music, a maqam it's both the notes you play and has something to do with how you move through them. And so each maqam will even have an emotional register. So calling them scales it's a bit more complicated than that, but for our purposes, we're saying, okay, this is a maqam scale, these are the notes. And that's all fixed and written. There's a lot of information on the internet, like maqamworld.com. I see. Well, and depending on the maqam, I mean, if you play the same note, whether it's high or low, it will be an octave apart. Yes.
Anything else? So this can be the ending title,
closer.
I think.
And actually, this is interesting because what we're about to see, these are the kids I was writing about 2.5 years ago in Monterrey. And when I first met them, they were 16 and 17 years old. Since then, like a year and a half later, everything has just gone up, up, up. And at this point, they're like Mexican superstars. Like they've been on all the big TV shows. They're traveling and touring the States. And it's really it's gone from a very intense youth subculture in Monterrey to like something with enormous success in Mexico and in the Mexican diaspora. And actually, like this video really helped translate it. It's them kind of making steps into this pop move. And so you're going to see they're dancing with these crazy pointed boots. Vice did a video which had enormous success about how these like rancher kids who like grow up in like hard rural circumstances, who love the tribal music because it speaks to this really interesting moment of Mexicanness youth right now, who are being total punks by wearing these ridiculous cowboy boots. And yeah, the video's loading.
Poco a poco, inténtalo, si lo quieres tú, inténtalo, vete de norte a sur, inténtalo, que solo soy de ti, no me dejes sin tu amor. Inténtalo, si lo quieres tú, inténtalo, vete de norte a sur, inténtalo, que solo soy de ti, no me dejes sin tu amor.
And so the interesting thing about this, I mean, actually, the kids with the boots are about to enter. There we go. And this track this is the first song the genre has produced. Before this, it was all DJ culture. Songs without singers, songs with only samples, songs with rappers but no chorus or nothing like this is the pop moment. And as you can see, it's totally nuts Aztec futurism. Oops, sorry.
Quiero sentir tu cuerpo juntito al mío porque mi alma ya tiene tiempo sintiendo frío. Si tú lo quieres, vete acercando junto conmigo. Poquito a poco, muy despacito, te estoy sintiendo más que bonito. Vete orillando por un rinconcito, te iré queriendo poco a poco. Inténtalo, si así lo quieres tú, inténtalo. Vete de norte a sur, inténtalo, que solo soy de ti. No me dejes sin tu amor. Inténtalo, si así lo quieres tú, inténtalo. Vete de norte a sur, inténtalo, que solo soy de ti. No me dejes sin tu amor.
Bene, grazie molte.